You're listening to 87.1 Caroline Radio, KCGM Bakersfield, your home for all your variety hits. And of course, Blind Advocate Radio. Hey, everybody, good evening. How are you? I'm glad you had a good week. So tonight I am joined by someone, and just a moment ago, he and I were laughing as two podcasters would. To tell you the truth, listener, that we aren't entirely sure what our specific topic was. But we know that you at home are going to help us figure it out by asking good questions as we have a conversation. And we know that Mr. Williams, Wilbert Williams from beautiful Jamaica, is going to walk us through basically his journey in podcasting. And I think that is where we share a lot of interests. Mr. Williams, pleasure to have you on Aaron's Opinion, and a very good evening to you. How are you? Go right ahead.
I am good, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me in.
My pleasure.
Yes. We first met when we were on a chat, and we discovered that both of us are involved in podcasting. I have been doing it now for a year. I have been just over a year. I have been producing a podcast called Vision Scope, which deals with providing information and when we started out, the information was really being provided to Caribbean listeners and informing Caribbean people about disabilities and, issues confronting people with disabilities. Then we discovered that, there is a need for this kind of discussion in the wider population. So we have gone, as far as we can, we have gone worldwide, and we have been distributing the podcasts to several feeds in the hope that it will get around the world. Currently, we have 3,000 listeners, which is not bad for a podcast, which has been going only a year, and with a defined theme like ours. So that's how it started, and I was interested in also learning that Aaron's Opinion is a weekly, and that you do a podcast on, I discover all types of topics, and that makes it even more interesting. So that's how we met Aaron, I think.
Great. Thank you for that. I have a question. When you started out your podcast, Vision Scope, a place to learn, as you call it, why did you say? I mean, it's just kind of interesting. Why did you say that it was at first a podcast only for the Caribbean? Reason being, when I opened Aaron's Opinion, I saw it as a podcast for the world, no particular country. What specifically makes you say that it was at first a podcast just for the Caribbean? Because today, podcasting is kind of a universal platform. There's no real nationality to it, really.
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't have much of a clue about podcasting. I knew that Anchor provided this platform,
mm-hmm.
and I had a life story that I wanted to tell. As a matter of fact, initially, I wanted to write a book on my life. But I decided that writing a book would be so expensive.
But no, it's not. No, but Mr. Williams.
So I did it as a series.
Well, you see, every guest I have, and I would love a guest like you to take me up on the offer. Almost every guest I have has been wanting to publish a book.
Yes.
And me at Aaron's Opinion, we want to welcome you to the idea of coming here and reading your book for us on my podcast. I would be really, really pleased to help you to do that, to help you to, read your book on this podcast as kind of a audio bookish podcast thing. I think that
Yes.
would be a really fun series.
Yes.
And
So
yes, yes.
so initially I started out the podcast by telling my life story. So it was kind of like a life story series, and that ran for about 9 months.
Hmm.
And the original programs were extremely short. You know, when you first start out, you're afraid to go too deep. So they ran for 6 or 7 minutes, then they gradually increased. And now we are up to, I think this week's episode, when it's published, will be about 47 minutes. So, but now we have moved away from the life story, because I think I have told all that I could remember of my life story. And I am now doing interviews and getting other people to tap into the program and to tell their story. And I'm finding it very interesting, because their stories are now verifying my story. And issues that I raised, they are also raising. So it has become it's almost like a network.
Definitely. So, would you like to tell us one of your life stories, or a really interesting story, or a story that really defines
You want me to
define?
go back to the beginning and tell you, which I can? Sure.
I would love that.
Yes.
A particularly educational story, a particularly
Yes.
powerful one, or
Sure.
of course a
Yes.
particularly entertaining one, because it should also be very
Yes.
inspirational and entertaining. Go right ahead.
Sure. Okay. Well, I was born in 1940, and it was during the time that World War II was in progress. Of course, in 1940, I would not have known anything about World War II. But as you grow and you read the history, you realize. And I had the privilege of starting school when I was 6 years old. And I started school at the Salvation Army School for the Blind, which was then the only school for the blind in Jamaica, and still is the only school for the blind in Jamaica. Now, if we go back a little bit in time, the School for the Blind was started in 1927 because two Salvation Army officers were sent from England to work in Jamaica. And they arrived here. One of them had a sister who was blind, and she was educated in England. And so I think that motivated them to want to do something for blind people in Jamaica. And they started the school back in 1927. So of course, by the time I started school in 1940, it was still in its infancy, fledgling kind of a situation. Now, in those days, School for the Blind was really built around teaching people who are blind to learn Braille, to read and write Braille, and also to do handicraft, basket making, chair caning, that kind of thing. There was not much more expectation, in my opinion, when I look at that early kind of work. When I came to school, just on a point of interest, there were two competing systems in school. One was Braille, and the other one was Moon. I don't know if you ever experienced it, Aaron. Moon is a system which allowed people to write, but not to read, but not to write. I think writing was extremely cumbersome. And the Moon system, unlike Braille, was based on letters that were sort of squished up to become very small. And so they embossed those letters on the page and people could read that way. Well, that was not very good. So I started out in school at a time when they didn't have qualified teachers in work for the blind. You came up through the school system and you seemed to be good enough and alert enough, and you were given a job as a teacher. And ironically enough, we didn't learn very much about Jamaica. The training was more about European history and, well, there was a good religious education, of course. We did some maths, and at the time of entering school, the maths program centered around the Taylor frame. I don't even know if many blind people today would know what the Taylor frame is. But the Taylor frame had a series of holes, and you would insert lead types into those holes. And based on how you position the type, you would get different numbers. So we went through school like that, and things continued. We did music, we did drama. But when I look back, there was not much of a future then. Now, in 1955, things began to change when a new set of Salvation Army officers arrived. Because, between the starting of the school, of course, and 1955, they would have had many changes because officers changed every 2 years. So you can understand that many managers passed through the school for the blind. But in 1955, a couple came to the school, sent by the Salvation Army, and they started to make changes. Now, you have to realize that in the early days, education and rehabilitation in general for blind and or people with any other form of disabilities was built around the institutional setting, the care setting. So in fact, the early school for the blind in Jamaica was called the Institute for the Blind. And that institute had, by the time I got to school, children and adults. Now, when the new managers came, they decided that this was not a good arrangement. And so, after a couple of years, they separated out the school from the adults. So the Institute for the Blind was really now at an end. And we got the school, the Salvation Army School for the Blind. And then on the other side, we had the workshops for the blind. And the workshops moved out of the school premises and went to a different location. Also, eventually, they brought in a teacher who was trained in a regular school system. She had no idea of special education, but she was a trained teacher, certified teacher. And so she came to the school and got us involved in national exams, which we did very well in those national exams. And 4 of us sat and passed all levels of the exams and were certified. And 2 of us obtained scholarships to go to a regular school. And that in itself was historic because that